Too Much Information is a production of iHeart Radio.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Too Much Information, the show that brings you the secret histories and little-known fascinating facts and figures behind your favorite TV shows, movies, music, and more. We are your two truck drivers of trivia. I should have written more of these. I'm just so excited to get into it. I'm Alex Heigl.
And I'm Jordan Runtagh, and I'm so happy at how excited you are right now. This is truly adorable.
That is because we are talking about maybe my favorite film of all time, if I'm being truly honest with myself. Like, I can front and talk about, Goodfellas or Paris, Texas, or any of my real highfalutin things that I dip my toe into. But if I'm being really honest, this is my favorite movie ever made. From one of my, if not, from probably my favorite director. A heady mix of creature costumes, ancient Chinese mysticism and kung fu films, and dumb red meat Americana from the 80s. That's right. We're talking about John Carpenter's Big Trouble in Little China. It is a movie that I saw when I was 8 or 9 years old and have been aggressively fixated on ever since. It's a comfort watch for me. It's a movie I love introducing people to because, like, I will put this movie on and then just watch the person watching it because it's just like that. You get so much out of it. It's funny on the surface, but then it just gets more and more bizarre. And like, by the time there's a giant shrimp bug coming out of the sewer to just randomly kill one of the heroes, and then that's never addressed again.
You'll notice that I texted you a lot in the beginning, and then I stopped because I was just like, what?
Yeah, it's oh man, and I really researching this and realizing the sort of stew that went into it. It really just confirms my opinion that it is like, I mean, I'd call it like grade A Carpenter. I know you like The Thing a little bit better, and it certainly doesn't have the like critical bona fides of something like Halloween. But holy shit, is this movie so much fun, and I love it. What did you think of it? No pressure.
I mean, I just, out of the gate, I find it fitting that on the heels of Pee-wee's Big Adventure, which is the tale of a man-child who wants his bike back, we're delving into the tale of a man-child who wants his truck back. So I really appreciated that right out the door. Right?
Yeah.
I considered playing a game where I wanted to see how far I could bluff it through this episode before admitting to you that I didn't watch it, but I knew that I couldn't do that to you. Yeah, I know. That would have just been, this meant so much to you.
Yeah.
And especially after all the double episodes you've done for my, triple episodes for my beloved Large Boat, I couldn't do that to you. Yeah, my main takeaway was really, I feel like I know you a lot better having watched this.
It's all there, man. Rubber suits, kung fu, quipping, false bravado.
I've watched a handful of things for you over the course of this series. Eraserhead, The Thing, Freaks and Geeks, and Big Trouble in Little China. And I would say that I definitely liked Big Trouble more than Eraserhead. Slightly less than The Thing. It's possibly because I'm not really all that into fantasy stuff. Or like kung fu fight movies, really. That's not really my area. And also, I found it, and I'm sure this is intentionally so, kind of disorienting on first watch. I just finished watching it intentionally. I wanted to get you my freshest takes possible. So I just, like the credits rolled for me like maybe 25 minutes ago. Yeah. So I this is very, very fresh. But I think it's supposed to be disorienting because your point of reference is the Kurt Russell character. And you're finding out what all these characters are, what all these supernatural things are as he is. So I almost feel like I need to watch it again just to have some semblance of what occurred.
It is amazing. I mean, I don't really think, I would be hard-pressed to think of another film that throws all this stuff.
Yes.
Certainly of the time.
Yeah.
Maybe since, but the only comparison it has is The Golden Child, which we'll get into later.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, like what do you if you were pitching and making an elevator pitch? I mean, you rattled off. You have a pretty stellar comparison here that I want to hear you read out loud.
I mean, I loved how truly singular and weird this movie was. I have never, a Golden Child aside, heard of another movie like it. I don't think it really, it's a stew, as you said, but it's definitely not derivative.
No.
I mean, my elevator pitch was that it's like Enter the Dragon meets Labyrinth meets Escape from New York meets John Wayne.
Yeah. That's good.
Did I miss anything?
Well, yeah, I mean, the conventional wisdom is that Kurt Russell's doing Clint Eastwood in Escape from New York as just like the ultimate badass. And then in this movie, he's doing John Wayne as a nincompoop, which, yeah. One of the things that I love most about this movie is how it really commits to keeping you in just as much of the dark as the main character.
Yeah.
Like there's those little glimpses of exposition, like when you see Egg Shan and Wang Chi's dad talking about like, they're doing like Chinese fortune telling. They're like, when the goat butts against the mountains, his horns become entangled in the roots. You're just like, what in God's name is happening? But they don't, like a movie today would probably pause and explain that to you.
Yeah.
And I think this is best illustrated by the aforementioned part in the sewer where the monster comes out and just completely hauls off and murders one of the protagonists. And the Egg Shen throws like a magic grenade at it and goes, "You will come out no more." And Kurt Russell just goes, "What? What will come out no more?" And the movie just keeps moving. And like, and
never
like
addresses it again.
Nope. And in like a Marvel movie or something today, they'd have a whole thing, or like, God forbid, like a Tolkien thing. They'd be like, "Well, that was actually Shishwalfafal the Destroyer, who was like, well," and go to this very pedantic thing. But Big Trouble's just like, nope.
You don't need to know. Yep.
Keep going. There's a guy's gonna explode in a minute.
We got more fights to see.
Yeah, another guy. There's gonna a guy is gonna self-inflate to death.
Sounds like some Willy Wonka like villainous end.
Oh man. Well, from the somewhat controversial genesis as a turn-of-the-century Western that the film had, to the backlash from Asian American advocacy groups in the entertainment industry that it faced upon its release, to that curious coincidence of a movie starring an infinitely more bankable star at the time, based in the same premise, happening to come out at more or less the exact same time. Here's everything you didn't know about Big Trouble in Little China. I didn't know this as much when I was a fan, but I really started getting into this because I love screenplay and like script doctoring stuff. It's so nerdy to me and so interesting. But like so many of the films that we've already covered here, Big Trouble in Little China came together because of Hong Kong. Specifically because of the amazing wave of action movies coming out of Hong Kong in the 1970s, and specifically a sort of mystical tinged film called The Butterfly Murders by a guy named Tsui Hark, who's a name in Hong Kong. And there was a screenwriter named David Z. Weinstein who was looking for a film to collaborate with his buddy Gary Goldman on. And he remembered thinking, if you took this film, The Butterfly Murders, and bring it to an American audience, give it a Hollywood-style plot structure, but also keep it Chinese, it could really blow people's minds. And that was the genesis of the idea. There's a whole interesting lineage of historical Chinese Hong Kong action martial arts that is like based in myths and legends. I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation, but it's wuxia is like the historical epic thing, like your Crouching Tiger stuff. And then all the Golden Harvest and Hong Kong stuff that was coming out that the Wu-Tang later became obsessed with and put in all of their songs is also kind of belongs to that branching subgenre. And the reason that Weinstein put it in San Francisco was because he was interested in a period in San Francisco's Chinatown that's called the Tong Wars. Tong is a word in Chinese that basically just translates to hall or gathering place. And essentially they were early on, they were just support systems for the waves of Chinese immigrants that were landing in the U.S. at the time period. And they were in a bunch of different cities, but as most things do, they became corrupted and were involved in all kinds of nasty stuff like literal human trafficking. Like a lot of what they were doing was bringing women in because there were infinitely more Chinese men in the country at the time than women. So one of the things that these Tongs were doing were trafficking women in to be wives and sex workers and such, but they were also involved in drugs and gambling. And the gang warfare between these organizations got so bad. The gang warfare between these different tongs would like have open battles in the streets by thugs that they had all hired, and oftentimes they were brawling with melee weapons like hatchets, and that's something that you actually see in a lot of Chinese cinema. There's a Jackie Chan movie called The Second Legend of Drunken Master, which is one of the best martial arts films of all time, by the way. Go watch that if you have any interest in it, where there's he and his buddy take on like a whole gang of guys just armed with hatchets, and that's like sort of a villainous stereotype. It's like in American action movies where you have like the bad bikers like that are just interchangeable enemies that get killed. That's like how hatchet men functioned in a lot of Hong Kong cinema. Anyway, the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco and the fire that really did more damage than the earthquake itself sort of wiped this era out, because most of the brothels and opium dens and gambling houses that were these criminal enterprises territory were just kind of wiped out. And as the city reconstructed itself, naturally, they put an end to the dens of iniquity. So, fascinated by that backdrop and the era during the gold rush when San Francisco was awash in cowboys, Goldman and Weinstein penned a screenplay called Lotus about a cowboy named Wiley Prescott, who befriends a railroad worker named Sun, who needs to meet his incoming fiancée at San Francisco's docks. And an evil sorcerer named Lo Pan intercedes, and crucially, takes Prescott's horse. And hijinks ensue. Oh man, we didn't talk about Lo Pan. I can't wait to talk about Lo Pan with you. Goldman said, "We felt like we were writing a brilliant movie that would be the next Raiders of the Lost Ark. It was a very unusual project, and still is. There's never been anything like it. So trying to do something unusual was a little bit of a risk, but we had great confidence that we could pull it off." Goldman and Weinstein's agent did request a new title, and Weinstein told Tara Bennett and Paul Terry for their making of The Big Trouble in Little China, this coffee table book that is out of print, and copies of it are going for like $250 online, and I cannot justify the expense. But it's a huge, beautiful book, and I'm obsessed with it.
If anybody has a copy that they are willing to part with, Heigl's birthday is coming up in less than a month.
It is. I also have to shout out Uprocks. Somebody at Uprocks like went ham on Big Trouble in Little China oral histories. There are like 4 separate 2,000-word features on the making of Big Trouble in Little China. So I didn't. Like an idiot, I scammed past the bylines, but shouts to them. Anyway, for the making of book, Weinstein says, "We spent a half a day brainstorming titles." And then Gary said, "How about Chinatown Gun?" Which, thank God they didn't go with that. Because the next suggestion was Big Trouble in Little China. So then they sold the script to a producer named Paul Monash, a real estate developer turned producer, because Hollywood is pay to play. If you have money from real estate, you can start making movies. Those two had made Sophie's Friggin' Choice. So what do I know? They clearly knew something. And then so the script was optioned into a movie at 20th Century Fox under Goldman's former boss, a guy named Larry Gordon, which was a bit awkward since Gordon had at one point fired Goldman. So if you're keeping track, these two wrote a script. It was optioned by the studio under a guy who had just fired one of them.
And this is perhaps the reason why the script went to a writer named W.D. Richter, who just directed The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension.
You ever seen that one?
Nope. And I mean, the title speaks volumes, but tell me more about this.
I mean, it is, I believe it is no, it was based on a novel, apparently. But it is just a bizarre film.
I gathered that by The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth.
Dr. Buckaroo Banzai is a physicist, neurosurgeon, test pilot, and a rock star, and is played by Peter Weller.
Does he have a podcast?
Well, he's played by Peter Weller, which is hilarious because to most people, Peter Weller is known as the sort of exoskeletal, quasi-lifelike star of RoboCop. So you just get that like severe Teutonic, like carved in stone Peter Weller presence in this deeply bizarre pulp film. But I don't think Richter was a director either. I think he was primarily a screenwriter.
What an insane cast. John Lithgow, Ellen Barkin, Christopher Lloyd, Jeff Goldblum, veteran character actor Dan Hedaya,
Yes!
Vincent Schiavelli. Oh my God. Okay, bookmarking this. Anyway, back to Big Trouble. Back to another
Clancy
bad,
Brown,
but
our
good
boy
movie.
Clancy Brown, the greatest pipes in the business. What a voice on that man. Jonathan Banks, friggin' Mike from Breaking Bad is in this movie. Holy shit.
What? Okay, yeah, we will be watching this imminently and possibly doing an episode on it. But for now, back to Big Trouble.
Yeah.
So this is the guy, the director of this insane movie is the guy who got put on the Big Trouble in Little China script, completely elbowing out the original two writers, Goldman and Weinstein. And this guy, W.D. Richter, he's the one who moved the time period of the movie up to modern day from the late 1890s, which is a change that the original writers still disagree with.
I want to see what you think of, because you're a screenwriter first. And I want to see what you think about his, because I think his assessment here is quite shrewd, actually.
Yes. The guy who was later brought on to co-write it, W.D. Richter, he felt that it was a mistake for the audience to have the, quote, double remove, first of a historical setting and then a fantastical adventure. It's basically, you're just suspending your disbelief too much. He said, you're asking audience to go to a period Western, get used to all these little eccentric realities, and then you go one step further into a yet more exotic world? I don't think so. And I think he's right. I think that's bad. As somebody who just watched it for the first time, knowing next to nothing about it other than that it was your favorite film, it wasn't that it was tough to follow. It was just like, what is that was the prevailing feeling, was what is happening at all moments, in the best way, in the way that you feel when you're on a thrill ride or something. But yeah, no, I think it would have been a little tougher. Yeah, in a funny way. The dialogue and Kurt Russell's just the bad John Wayne impression, in my mind, it almost felt like a Western anyway.
Sure.
Like, to make it explicit would have probably just muddied the waters
Putting
a
a
bit.
hat
I mean,
on a
obviously,
hat.
yeah, I mean, he had a truck, obviously, but still.
The Pork Chop Express. Dude,
the
when I
opening
saw
with the CB radio stuff was so good.
It's, you just tell him that when it knocks the back of your favorite head up against the wall. That's such a great line. Yeah, man, his dialogue in this is gold. When I saw John Carpenter play a bunch of his film scores live, the Pork Chop Express song, like not the Big Trouble in Little China theme, which we'll talk about, but the Pork Chop Express song killed live. Like,
I'm sure.
He does these little intros for each song, and so everyone knows what's coming, but still, when the guitarists hit that, it's just like the roof just lit. It's just so great. Yeah.
Let's tell my ex-wife, I never drive faster than I can see. I mean, that's great. That's great.
Yes.
Come on, I've seen this movie once and I remembered that.
Yes.
But another reason for moving the time period from the 1890s to present day, or then present day, was a much more practical concern. He said it's a much more complicated thing to have to make. You have to create 1890s San Francisco. And I just finished Buckaroo, the aforementioned Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension, and I knew how hard it was to create a whole world and make it up out of thin air. And geez, wouldn't it be great to be able to point the camera at something that existed at a real location? And worry about the content of the script and performances rather than, do we have the right building behind us? Do we have the money to make it look like the 1890s?
Yeah, and it's funny that John Carpenter and W.D. Richter knew each other from film school. They both went to USC Film School. And Carpenter would say, Rick and I went through all 3 production classes together. We each had our own crews, so we never actually collaborated on a film. Carpenter also did script doctor work on a screenplay that Richter had called The Ninja, which was a big, I didn't know anything about this movie, probably because it never got made, but it was this big historical epic that was in development hell from 20th Century Fox in the 80s. That was at one point they were going to have star Richard Gere. Yeah.
Is that rumor about him and the gerbil real?
I don't know, man. In all my time in the gossip trenches, I don't think of all the quote-unquote allegedly closeted male celebs, I just don't think people, it's like that Mad Men thing. I don't think people think about Richard Gere anymore. Not since Runaway Bride, at least.
Dr. T and the Women.
Was he in Runaway Bride? Am I making that up?
I think he was.
He was. Okay. Yeah, so 1999, like, come on.
But original writer Gary Goldman argued against this change in one of the many pieces on uprocks.com. Once you make the story contemporary, that changes a lot. Our idea was that because it was set in the past, it was much more like Raiders of the Lost Ark, where the hero wasn't as ridiculous because he didn't need to be. Jack Burton is a truck driver who encounters Chinese magic, and by making it contemporary, you had to turn it into really a full-on comedy. He also added to Entertainment Weekly, the idea that we would be rewritten was not so unthinkable, although in this case, the idea that you would have something so original and not speak to the original writers about it did strike us as being bizarre and unfair.
Yeah, I do feel bad for them, and like anyone, when there's something gets taken and butchered, but this is the business we've chosen. The two eventually had to go to the WGA for arbitration for credit, but Goldman snuck in a particularly writerly bit of vengeance. I love this. He was brought on to rewrite the Total Recall, the Arnold Schwarzenegger film, a few years later, and he made one particular change. Michael Ironside's villain in that film is named Richter. And you better believe that guy dies horribly. Just a little petty. It might not even be true. Like, I mean, it's true. Obviously, that's the name of the character. I don't know if that was why he did it, but if he did, writer's revenge.
Yeah, speaking as a screenwriting major, I can say that they are a petty group of people, and I 100% believe that that's the case. So, wait, I have a question for you.
Go on.
As evidenced by your incredibly thorough history of kung fu films from the beginning of this episode, and also the episode we did a long time ago on
Fist of Fury.
Fist of Fury.
Yeah.
Was this the movie Big Trouble in Little China that got you into kung fu films?
Oh, yeah, I didn't even mention how I got this. No, so I started doing Taekwondo when I was 5 or 6 because Power Rangers came on, and my parents wanted me to make do a sport, and I was like, I want to do that. So I don't even know how they... Oh, I do know. Through a friend who was also doing Taekwondo at this studio, we landed there, and that was like my thing when I was a kid. I didn't do any other sports. I just did Taekwondo. And they, you have these things called promotions where you have to go in and you basically do all your little kicks and your stuff in front of a panel of judges, and you get a new belt. And the place where I was doing all this at for a while had movie nights after their promotions. And, in the ultimate hands-off era of the early 90s, they were just like, yeah, we'll show you, Enter the Dragon, which has nudity and gratuitous violence. Or they'll be like, we'll show you Big Trouble in Little China. And yeah, dude, it was like, as baffled and enthralled as you were, imagine being a 9-year-old kid hopped up on Cherry Pepsi and Twizzlers and watching this movie at like gymnasium lock-in style, where you're like, I'm unsupervised. Like, so really, that's how I got into it, and that's why it's that thing that you lock onto as a kid as being the coolest thing ever stays there.
I had that same experience, but with Apollo 13 and not at Taekwondo. and then I went to space camp,
then you went to
broke
space
me
camp.
of it. And then I went sent home early because I was crying too much.
I mean, if anything cured me of being fascinated in space, it was watching the movie Alien at like 6.
Yeah, you've spoken at length about how much that movie upset you.
Yeah. Probably the other reason I love John Carpenter is because there was a kid who grew up down the street from me who, for whatever reason, was obsessed with the Halloween franchise. And have I told this story on this podcast before?
I remember. Tell me again. I might have been just to me. It might have been in our session.
So in one of our sessions, so how like little idiot boys play like ninjas or G.I. Joe or whatever. Where you
no, but go on.
Okay, well, with like some of my other friends at that age, we would play like G.I. Joe, where we would like run around with because America is a hellscape, we would run around with fake guns and pretend we were like.
Did you grow up in the 50s?
Yeah, kind of. Or
Which
like
is rich
ninjas.
Coming from me.
Or like ninjas, where we would just like run around and like play fight with swords and stuff. Because I like big yards and like that kind of shit.
Yeah.
So this kid down the street from me, his idea of a fun time was to play Halloween, where he would dress up in a boiler suit and a Mike Myers mask and stalk me through the friscolating dusklight of our neighborhood with a plastic butcher knife.
Was this run by you beforehand, or did he just start doing it one day?
No, I just pitched it
and you
as an
gradually pieced
activity.
it together. Oh, he pitched it. Okay, well, at least he pitched it.
I mean, I was like, okay. But I was like scared of that shit. Like I remember his one party, he must have turned 10 right before Halloween H2O came out, or like around that era, so 97. And so for his birthday party, we had a sleepover where they just watched all of them. And I was so scared by 1 and 2 that I tapped out for 4, 5, and 6. And just like was in the other room, like sleeping, trying to sleep with my head under my pillows, just hearing screams through the wall. And people wonder why I'm so fixated on horror as a genre. Just a few formative memories that really drive that into your psyche.
Did I ever tell you my time machine story from my little bastard next door neighbor?
No, but does this have to do with your fixation on trying to travel back in time to the 50s?
Maybe, kind of. So, yeah, we had these older boys who lived next door. They were like 12 and I was like 6. And they used to like to kind of, one of them in particular used to like to torment me. We lived on a lake and he used to take dead fish on rakes and like fling them at me. So that wasn't nice. And I saw Back to the Future and I loved it. That's my favorite movie, even more so than Large Boat. And I had a plastic big wheel tricycle. And I had a little area in the backyard that I transformed into my laboratory, and I taped a bunch of bits of paper and like cardboard toilet paper tubes and stuff onto my tricycle to make it into a time machine. I made a little flux capacitor out of construction paper and a little like keypad to type in the date. And I spent a couple afternoons outfitting my big wheel, and then I started pedaling it as fast as I could in circles around the little back walk. And eventually, one of the kids next door came over and asked me what I was doing, and I explained that I was trying to pedal through time. I'd made my very own time machine. And he said, oh, no, you're doing it all wrong. You know, in the movie, they got to go up to 88 miles an hour.
Oh, God.
Like, that's, you're not going anywhere near fast enough. And so, oh, man, what am I going to do? And he said, well, why don't you go to the top of the driveway? And now my driveway at the house we still have, actually, was 400 feet long, and it sloped down at a 45-degree angle that ended in a 12-foot sheer cliff into a lake. And so I hauled the thing up there, and I remember getting to the top, and he came with me. And again, he was like 12, and I was like 5 or 6. And I'm up there straddling the bike, about ready for blast off, and I turn to him, and I remember saying, well, wait a minute, what about the lake? Like, I want to go back to 1955 like Marty McFly did. What about the lake? The lake will be there. Oh, no, it won't. No, back in the 50s? Nah, the lake won't be there, no. And so I shove off. And my only real snapshot memory of the whole experience was that there were sparks flying out the back wheel of the bike. It was going so fast. And which I thought boded very well. I thought, oh my God, it's working.
Happening.
It's
happening.
No, it's happening. But yeah, no, the bike flipped. I went into a hedge, and the bike went over the edge of the little mini cliff into the lake. And I've been trying to get back to 1955 ever since.
Kinder trauma.
Formative influences. Yeah. John Carpenter. There we go.
Segue.
See, I did that on purpose. I put it right there for a reason.
So John Carpenter 101 is that he loves Westerns. And specifically, he loves Howard Hawks' Rio Bravo. He said something to the effect of, every film that I make is a remake of Rio Bravo. And, that the Western framing is especially obvious in his obsession with Panavision, shooting in Panavision scope, and the beautiful, big, wide American landscape style images that you like. So much of his and my boy Dean Cundy. I love Dean Cundy. I found out that he and Carpenter actually had a falling out over the Thing, apparently, because they were. I don't know if it was just that much of a nightmare to shoot out in the wilderness like that, but they didn't work together on Starman, which was Starman actually starring Jeff Bridges, for which he was nominated for an Oscar, was what basically got Carpenter the clout, I think, to get big budget money to make this movie. Anyway, so they didn't work together on Starman, but he came back for Big Trouble. So anyway, Carpenter loves Westerns, right? But despite this movie starting as a Western, he was not the studio's first choice to make the movie. That would have been Walter Hill, the 80s action icon who directed The Warriors and who Larry Gordon, the executive, had worked with on 48 Hours. It's funny because Goldman and Weinstein wanted Clint Eastwood to direct and star in their original, idea for Big Trouble. But Hill passed, and the film came across John Carpenter's desk. And this is where the Big Trouble Golden Child thing has such a legend about it, because Carpenter was asked to do The Golden Child. He turned down because he thought Big Trouble was more interesting.
Which it is.
Yeah, I mean, for anybody who's not familiar, because this movie seemingly doesn't exist, it's been like completely memory hold. There's a ton of people who have just no idea about it. It does not have the cult following. But Golden Child is basically Eddie Murphy is an LA social worker, and he has to go and rescue a child, the titular Golden Child, to save the world. And it has a ton of trappings that are very similar to Big Trouble, which we'll get into later. Anyway, Carpenter told Entertainment Weekly, though, that he saw his first kung fu film in 1973, The Five Fingers of Death. And he name-dropped Masters of the Flying Guillotine and Zoo, The Warriors of Mystic Mountain, as some of his other favorites. And those are funny because those have all been name-dropped by either the Wu-Tang Clan or Quentin Tarantino at various points. I believe there is a line in Wu-Tang Clan Ain't Nothing to F With when he says, and the survey says, bam, you're dead. Fatal flying guillotine chops off your fucking head. And he told Uproxx, John Carpenter did, they really are a unique kind of cinematic form. They're extremely innocent, but incredibly violent. It's hard to describe them. They're really strange and have all these oddball things that happen in them. They're delightful. He took no issue with the setting change to making the film in the modern day, but the changes that he made to Richter's script mostly involved renamings. He said Rick had included some names of real Chinese triads. We had to change them because we're going to get sued. We had to make up a bunch of names. Yeah, or murdered. Triads are real. They are real gangsters. There's nothing you can do about it. You don't want to fool around with them. My wife was like, she was like, how many John Carpenter smoking cigarettes impressions are you going to do in this one like you did in The Thing? And sure enough, I was watching an interview with him from around the making of, and he just lights up in the middle of the interview. This was in 1986 when you could do that sort of thing on TV and in a studio. But Carpenter quickly pulled in other members because, okay, so the thing about the Golden Child is that Fox knew that Paramount had this movie in production. And so they basically I think Carpenter probably agreed to it, but they gave him a very short production time because they wanted to get this movie out to beat Golden Child, because they were operating under the correct assumption that opening anything against Eddie Murphy at this point in the 80s was commercial suicide. And it in fact was. So Carpenter wanted to bring back people he'd worked with. That includes Tommy Lee Wallace. For Second Unit, they go way back to USC and Halloween, and Dean Cundy is cinematographer, and the guy who was production designer on The Thing, a guy named John J. Lloyd, who is this legendary production designer and just the most taciturn, like, not fun guy to watch interviews of. There's an AFI interview with him that I watched where they just are like feeding him the names of his movies, and he's like, yeah, that was a good one. Just like completely over their shit by the time they got to him to interview. Weirdly enough, in the DVD commentary track, Kurt Russell and John Carpenter claim that one of the sets for the film, I assume the street set, was used for a Janet Jackson music video. And because I'm a nerd, I went and tried to find which one it would have been. The only video that matches the timeline for it is her first music video for Dream Street. But I watched that music video a lot, and I couldn't pinpoint exactly how the set figured in. But that's something that you now know. So go nuts with that information.
I am at this very moment.
I was going to say, are you trying to pinpoint the set?
One of the sets that's supposed to be Chinatown, where the gangs brawl during a funeral, took over 2 square blocks at Fox's Stage 6, which Dean Cundy made to look like foggy San Francisco by draping a silk over the entirety of the stage's ceiling. Hilariously, Dean Cundey said in the making of book that John Carpenter offered him the gig while the pair were flying a helicopter over Santa Barbara. I guess John Carpenter had gotten his license before Cundey and brought him out claiming to help him practice for his own test and had offered him the gig. Wait, okay.
Yeah.
I don't understand how you drape silk over the entirety of a stage set to make it look foggy.
Well, so the sets are ceilingless, right? Like that's the classic thing. And so the storefronts probably only went up like maybe a story and a half. So you find a shitload of silk.
It seems like there should have been a cheaper way to do that.
I mean, Dean
Cashmere.
Cundey, our boy Dean Cundey is, the guy who was filming shit in sub-zero temperatures for the thing. So I'm sure he tried a variety of materials.
It's like, wait, I can feel my face? Oh, this is great.
This is so easy.
How much silk can we buy? I'm so happy I could buy a load of silk.
I mean, I think this is the highest budget Carpenter ever had. So like there was money flowing for this.
What did he make before this?
Starman.
Oh, okay. So yeah.
Yeah. Which you might like, actually. It's a little bit sweeter and more it's like him doing E.T.
Out of allegiance to David Bowie, I can't.
Fair. Carpenter then hired casting director Joanna Merlin to fill out the majority Asian American cast. Once again, truly amazing that there's like 3 white people in this movie. She pulled in Victor Wong, who plays the good sorcerer Egg Shen, Dennis Dunn, who plays Wang Chi, the film's hero, as well as James Hong, who is a legend. He was finally basically re-recognized for his role as the grandfather in Everything Everywhere All at Once. But the guy, he was one of these guys who was making like 10 movies a year for 50 years. And my God, he is so damn funny in this movie. Funnily enough, Jackie Chan turned down the role of Wang. Can you imagine that? It was because John Carpenter had seen him in his first American language movie and wanted to cast him, but his English wasn't good enough. And I think the film had kind of flopped, so he went back to Hong Kong. Dennis Dunn, this is his second film role.
He's so good.
He's so charismatic. He's so great and so funny. He had only been in this movie called Year of the Dragon, which we'll talk about later. It was a Michael Cimino's movie after doing, I think right after Heaven's Gate, maybe not. Yeah, it was his first film after Heaven's Gate, Year of the Dragon, and it is so racist, starring Mickey Rourke. It was co-written with Oliver Stone, so like of course it is. But John Carpenter saw Dennis Dunn in that and was like, "Come be in my movie that's not going to be racist." Victor Wong is also amazing. He's like a Bay Area icon. He was like hanging out at City Lights in the 50s with all the beat poets. He's like a genuine Bay Area like eccentric, and those guys actually have a beautiful friendship. And they also went on to star in Prince of Darkness, which is like a B tier John Carpenter movie from 87 or 88. And but yeah, he wanted to work with those guys again. Anyway, Joanna Merlin also brought in Kim Cattrall. Beautiful. God, she's so pretty in this movie and such a delight. They're doing like that rat-a-tat like mid-century
Humphrey
banter
Bogart,
dialogue.
Long
Yeah, oh my
Bacall,
God, it's so good. She was mostly unknown at this point. The studio wanted her in there because of Porky's and Police Academy. Perhaps more germane to your interests, Kate Burton, the daughter of Richard Burton, is playing the journalist Margot Price.
Did she do anything after this? I can't believe Richard Burton's daughter was in this. And
Hell yeah.
Mostly theatrical stuff, I think. Okay.
Yeah. But she said in an interview that she teaches like acting master classes, and she says this is the film she gets asked about the most.
Oh, I mean, she was in First Wives Club. Okay, she was woman in bed in First Wives Club,
a classic, befitting the daughter of the Burtons,
the Burton lineage.
Yeah.
Wow, that's wild. Hilariously, Kim Cattrall, speaking of classically trained, was classically trained. She would leave the Big Trouble in Little China set and go to star in Steinwenge's staging of Chekhov's Three Sisters at the new Los Angeles Theater Center. She recalled having to explain to studio executives who Chekhov, the legendary playwright, was. It also took her 15 minutes to be able to film after inserting the green contact lenses into her eyes for her character, because that's how long it took her eyes to stop watering.
Yeah, and Carpenter actually, I think, put in a bit of backstory for her character that was ultimately not used in the movie. Gracie Law, the character, was supposedly born... don't panic, everyone. It's just me, Gracie Law.
It's very comic book. It's very, I mean, in the way that the Indiana Jones movies were sort of a tribute to those 30s pulp comic books, it feels very similar.
Indiana Jones, though, they're playing it straight.
Right. Yeah.
And this film has a wink to it. According to her exposition, she was born in China to missionary parents, and they were massacred. So they wisely cut that as a bit of exposition. And it's a little bit confusing in the film. I never got this until doing this research. When they show up to rescue the women, she is hogtied and gagged, and that was due to a scene that had also been cut from the shooting script. It was never filmed, where she's like sassing the guards. So they hogtie her and gag her. And Kim Cattrall showed up to set, and because this scene had been cut, she was unaware that she was about to be hogtied and gagged for a day of shooting. And John Carpenter said she was a trooper about it. He would be like, "You okay? Like, how you doing in this? Do you want?" She just asked for drinks of water. And when he asked if she was uncomfortable, she says, "I've been in tighter situations than this." She is one of the things that Carpenter is constantly cited for is having Hawksian heroines. The archetypal Howard Hawks heroine is very, sassy, brassy, can-do woman. And that's most, I think, notable in Assault on Precinct 13, where one of the, three leads is this, brassy lady.
Bogart and McCall, he did The Big Sleep.
Yes.
So it's got that dialogue, yeah.
And sharp-eyed students of Hong Kong cinema, or nerds, will notice a number of distinctive martial arts heavies filling out the ranks of the film. Probably the most non-nerdy one for this is a guy named Al Leong, who has the incredible combination of balding with shoulder-length hair and handlebar mustache. And he is most familiar to non-nerds as Genghis Khan in Bill and Ted.
That was his real hair and facial hair setup?
Yes, it was.
Wow.
He's also the bad guy in Lethal Weapon, who electrocutes Mel Gibson. Hit him again, Endo. And he's also in Die Hard. Gerald Okamura is James Liu and Dan Inosanto fill out the ranks of the martial artists in the film. Dan Inosanto credited as the guy who showed Bruce Lee the nunchucks, which is a pretty cool thing to have on your CV under skills.
Special skills.
Okamura is interesting too because he's got this great heavy look. He's got the kind of Fu Manchu and bald and these tremendous eyebrows. But he's a real deal martial artist. He's designed a number of weapons, which I guess is a thing that you do if you get really into this sort of stuff. And then when he was at this giving an interview at a cast reunion, how he shows up and he's like, "Yeah, all right, I'm a black belt. I'm in a bunch of different disciplines. I'm a weapons specialist." And they were like, "Cool, take these 6 guns." And he was also laughing because he didn't know how to use them, but he's given these big Sancho Panza bandoliers, and he was laughing because he was like, "There's no way those cartridges would actually fit in those guns." So that's a technical error. Cinema sins. Ding. Also, Jeff Imada was another guy in there who talks about there simply weren't a lot of Asian American stuntmen at the time, so the people who were working on this film were often just redressed as different people. They were like slapped a mustache on them or a hat or a new wig, and they just had him play multiple roles. So everybody wound up beating everybody else up as different people, which I love. Also, the guy who plays one of the henchmen, who inflates himself to death later on, the character's name is Thunder. He was played by a guy named Carter Wong, who was supposedly, according to Hong Kong legend, one of the only people that Bruce Lee was afraid of. And John Carpenter talked about how sweet this guy was. He's this, muscle-bound martial artist who like trained the Hong Kong police force as part of his day job. And he talks about him just having this like solid ridge of callus across his knuckles. But he said he had an incredibly high voice. just the little details about this that I have loved since I began researching it, since this afternoon.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more Too Much Information in just a moment.
Though the character of Wiley Prescott would be reborn as Kurt Russell's trucker Jack Burton, the character's dynamic, as you indelibly put it, a completely inept loser to everyone but himself, was there from the start. One of the original writers, Gary Goldman, told Uproxx, instead of a comical cowboy hero, he's a blowhard. He has real skills, but he's not the scary cowboy. And in the end, he's just all talk. And much of his rewritten dialogue for the next draft of the script through writer W.D. Richter was based, apparently, on Richter's interpretation of if Donald Trump had been a truck driver.
Sort of makes sense.
Yeah.
Carpenter wanted to reteam with Kurt Russell, his leading man from The Thing and Escape from New York. But the studio, aside from wanting Clint Eastwood, they wanted Jack Nicholson for this. I can imagine him doing the CB scenes, but not much else.
Yeah.
Doesn't Jack Nicholson not like to move in his movies since like 1980? After The Shining, he was like, I'm not going to do any more moving.
Does that work for you? I mean, I could hear him doing a bad John Wayne impression.
Yeah,
I mean, his voice is a bad John Wayne impression, really.
Yeah, that's true. Neither of those panned out, and so Kurt Russell was in, and per the May 1986 issue of Cinefantastique, Russell turned down the movie Highlander, also another iconic 80s action property, on the advice of Goldie Hawn, his girlfriend and common-law wife. She was like, no, you should do Big Trouble, which is another check mark in my column of reasons to love Goldie Hawn, is that she got Kurt Russell to star in this movie. He had never driven an 18-wheeler before, which he learned to do for this film. He said he was a little bit concerned about it because the set was very tight, and to get in character, he installed a CB radio in his Chevy Blazer. He actually got sick during filming. Part of the reason that he looked so sweating all the time is because that he was filming through like 105-degree fever. I love the friendship I love male friendship. You can quote me on that. I'm not afraid to say it. And so do
listeners of this show.
And the male friendship between Kurt Russell and John Carpenter is adorable, especially knowing that Carpenter has described Russell as to the right of Genghis Khan politically. And Carpenter is such a old hippie. Dude, have you ever seen They Live?
No.
The movie that he made after this that I believe is responsible for coining the line, I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum.
And then South Park did the
the fight scene.
Yeah.
So that movie is so wildly quote unquote anti-American and anti-leftist. It has cops getting shot. It has cops clearing homeless encampments. The whole film is structured around the idea that America's ruling class are aliens who are just using Earth for its resources. Anyway, John Carpenter and Kurt Russell are besties. Their commentary track for this movie is hilarious. They are just shooting the shit openly at certain points. Like, I think Russell asks about Carpenter's kids' baseball game or basketball game at one point, just like while they're recording. And so Russell, it was like he was leery that he was being cast because he was in kind of a fallow period as far as his career was concerned, because The Thing, well, if you recall, had been a big flop. And Carpenter said he just wanted someone who was right for the role.
Oh, shucks.
His pal Kurt coming in. And so Russell says the reason I'm building to this is that Russell says he was concerned about hitting someone with the truck. Carpenter says he was more concerned about damage to the truck. At another point, He says he was too busy smoking weed to ever have seen the computer wore tennis shoes, which is one of Kurt Russell's early Disney movies.
This is the point of the episode where I have to remind folks that the day that Walt Disney died in December 1966, he wrote the following on a notepad by his bed in the hospital, and no one knows why. He wrote the names Ron Miller, which was his son-in-law, Way Down Cellar, which is an episode of The Magical World of Disney, which would eventually air in January 1968, a year after his death, Kurt Russell, with his first name misspelled Kirt, CIA Mobley, thought to be Roger Mobley, who was a frequent cast member on the Magical World of Disney TV show, who later went on to be a Green Beret. So maybe CIA Mobley, maybe there's a deeper meaning there. And then he died.
With Kurt Russell, the last thing on his mind. May we all go so well.
Musing over Kurt Russell and the CIA.
One of the most quietly revolutionary things about this film, maybe not quiet, it's pretty on the face about it, is how it flips literally every convention of Hollywood action movies at the time on its head. Burton is the quote-unquote fish out of water, yes, and he's the audience's POV into this fantastic world, yes, but if you compare this to every other martial arts or action movie made at the time, that's where the similarities end. Jean-Claude Van Damme in Bloodsport is also a fish out of water. He goes into this topsy-turvy world of Hong Kong bare-knuckle brawling matches, but ultimately he triumphs handily. Chuck Norris, Steven Seagal, like the archetype of these movies is like these, hard-bitten American archetype characters go into these worlds and then beat them. And their preternatural competence in ass-kicking grants them safe passage and eventual triumph. But in Big Trouble, Jack Burton strides into every situation like a macho man before the film immediately makes it clear that he is a hapless moron. And as John Carpenter told Entertainment Weekly, Jack Burton is a guy who is a sidekick but doesn't know it. He's an idiot blowhard, an American fool in a world he doesn't understand. Tremendous. He told Uprocks, Carpenter did, Kurt's not the kind of actor who brings his personality into a movie. He's just a constant actor, so he plays the role, he plays the script. We thought about it for a long time, and I said, well, what do you want to play here? And Kurt Russell said, I think he plays as blowhard John Wayne. That's what I've decided.
Do you feel that that's a fair assessment of Kurt Russell's acting ability? Do you feel that he doesn't bring his character into a movie?
No, actually, I don't. I think every... Okay. Well, part of it is that he's just got that fucking face, He's got that, like, lantern jaw that his kid... Have you ever seen his kids acting now? Wyatt Russell just has that jaw, And I, granted, have not seen the Elvis movie that they did together, that John Carpenter and Kurt Russell did, but yeah... He a lot of coasting on the hair and the jawline. But yeah, he delivers the line. This is my favorite performance of his, I think. I mean, The Thing is great. He has that kind of steely, but it's like you said, man, the dialogue in this is all endlessly quotable. The timing he has in this movie where he's like, they're fighting their way out of the hideout, and he's like, all right, here's how we're gonna play this, and like gives them the whole thing, and then opens the door and is faced with a wall of bad guys, slams the door shut, turns around and goes, we may be trapped. Yeah, man, he's so funny in this. And to his credit, Carpenter knew what he was doing here was risky. He told Uprocks, Jack doesn't do much throughout the film in terms of being an action hero, which is very different from all the other action heroes that were out around the time. Also one of the reasons why the studio was less than happy with it. Dennis Dunn, who plays Wang, said he remembered Carpenter telling him, I don't know if they're ready for this. And Dunn actually got this role because he was offered a part in a TV movie around the same time, and his agent was like, you should pass on this Big Trouble thing. But Dennis Dunn decided to take it because he was a fan of the aforementioned Buckaroo Banzai and recognized W.D. Richter's name. So he's like, I'm going to go for that.
The studio certainly wasn't ready for what John Carpenter was doing with his protagonist. Presented with the original cut of Big Trouble in Little China, studio head Barry Diller mandated that the scene in the lawyer's office at the top of the film, in which Egg Shen recounts how great a man Jack Burton is, be added, that we're all in Jack Burton's debt, just to give audiences Just to make them seem like less of a screw up.
They had to, yeah. They were like, you cannot have a hero that is not like you have to underline his quote unquote heroism. So they shot that after everything else. It's just like, and the guy they got in it is the lawyer who goes on to play Deep Throat in the X-Files, which I love. That's where you recognize that guy from.
You know what? I think you're right. Yeah. There are some very dear to me friends of the pod whose name I won't mention because I feel like it would embarrass them. Have been begging us to do an X-Files episode.
So much.
It's so deep.
Yeah.
It's so much. I know. I still feel bad though. Another mandate from the studio for Big Trouble in Little China: the exposition explaining the two gangs during the funeral scene. Apparently, having all the bad guys in black and the good guys in white was not clear enough. John Carpenter said that all this kind of, what I was talking about earlier, kind of confusing, just tossing in at the deep end of this movie, was intentional because Jack Burton is a point of view character and the audience is supposed to be a little confused by what's happening. Critics also really didn't like the fact that Jack Burton doesn't appear to really care about Gracie Law, the female lead, by the end of this movie, and he actually rejects her offer to go on the road with him, which was meant as like an inversion of the common action movie romance trope. It's pretty funny.
It's one of my favorite cuts because she does the whole sexy come hither thing where she's like, the only way I think we could make it work is if you got one of those trucks with the little sleeping compartment in the back, just big enough for two.
For two, yeah.
And then the next scene is him on the sleeping again, just like the same way he started the movie, just talking to no one, soliloquizing to no one.
It's the Seinfeld law. No hugging, no learning.
Yeah. I found this great interview. I put the timestamp in, but you'll hear it now.
How early did you get the impression that maybe your view of this film and Fox's view of this film may not have been from the same dimension?
It was after I finished shooting the film. After I finished shooting. They'd seen all the dailies. They'd watched everything that I had shot. I cut it together and showed it to them, and they had never realized it was a comedy. Or maybe that wasn't it exactly. They didn't realize it was this kind of comedy. They were worried that the white guy was too stupid in the film, that all the Asians were better than he was. I said, that's the point. That's what the movie's about. It's about this idiot, who stumbles into a world he doesn't understand, staggers through it, does absolutely nothing, and thinks he's done everything, and staggers away into the night. That's the film. This isn't the script I read. This is what the movie is.
Here's a question, and I'm sure that there's a better way to phrase this. Was that done on purpose to make a political point, or was that done on purpose because they just thought it would be funny to have this big beefcake guy be a dope?
That's hard to say. I don't think I can't parse Richter's intent with rewriting it or those original guys. I certainly know that once Carpenter decided that that's what he wanted to do, that's what he did. But I don't think it was from any particular advocacy standpoint. Which brings us to our next point. During Big Trouble in Little China's production, several Asian American groups were actively condemning the 1985 movie that we just mentioned, Year of the Dragon, for its negative depictions of Chinese and Chinese American people. I have never seen this movie, but it is apparently quite racist in the way that something co-written by Oliver Stone and starring Mickey Rourke must be. Really bad, apparently. And so at a 2015 cast reunion for Big Trouble, Peter Kwong, who's the actor who played Rain, one of the Three Storms, the supernatural henchman, the one with the great hair, which is a wig, he explained that Carpenter was in fact sensitive to this. He said he really asked for all of us to put in our input. And community leaders from San Francisco were invited to the set to get a closer look at production. James Hong, the aforementioned legend who plays David Lopan, said in an interview that John gave us all a chance. Jim Lau, James Liu, and Jeff Imada were the stunt coordinators, choreographers, and they were promoted to associate producers by the end of the film. That's the work that they put in. So I don't really think... Yeah, I don't think Carpenter was deliberately trying to make a statement. I think that once it came together and he treated everyone well and stuck to the conceit of it, but I don't think he was like, let's put one up the ass of Michael Simono and anti-Asian American discrimination. He might have been thinking, let's put one up the ass of Michael Cimino, but probably not the second thing.
Peter Kwong, the actor who played Rain, recalled to Uproxx that protests over the film began as soon as plot details were leaked, with organizations sending letters to John Carpenter and 20th Century Fox. Dennis Dunn, who played, I can't remember
Wang Chi.
Wang Chi, yes. Explained that John Carpenter shared one of the letters with him so that he'd be aware of what was going on. Dunn said, in the mid-'80s, China was just opening up at the end of the Cultural Revolution in the late 70s, and there were these things about China that Americans were curious about. That's why I started getting work. Actually, I was going to quit acting. I was doing theater for nothing in San Francisco for about 7 or 8 years. I had to make a living, so I was going to quit. Even then, I saw there were a lot of things people were going to protest, but I thought, I don't really know anything about this business. I guess I'll just go back to retail. That's what I was going to do for work. I was doing marketing. That's sad.
I know, it's so amazing to me though, that he was in Year the Dragon, which everyone slams, and then Carpenter was like, all right, and gives him a role he'll be remembered for forever. And then he decided to go back to theater. I think that's all he does now. But there's a fascinating LA Times article about this controversy that mentioned leaflets were distributed by protesters that called Dennis Dunn's character a yes man to Russell, which is, of course, wildly inaccurate to anyone who's watched the movie. The film's marketing coordinator, a guy named Daniel Kwan, said that he met with the groups over the script and asked them what specific changes that they made, and nobody had anything specific. They just objected to the overall vibe. Literally, one of these groups told the LA Times for the article, we aren't objecting to specific lines, but the overall impression of the movie. And this is really fascinating. I love this too. One of the characters that they objected to is the Noel Toy, as the actress who plays the Madam, and they said that she was like a dragon lady stereotype, which, to be fair, she is. That's her role in the movie. But that woman, Noel Toy, is incredibly famous in the annals of American performing arts and San Francisco. She was the first Chinese American to perform the fan dance, the like, you know, you strip and you're hiding the choice bits behind the big fans. She got famous for doing that in San Francisco and New York. She was literally nationally famous, and worked at a nightclub in San Francisco called Forbidden City, which is the nation's first and only Chinese nightclub. So even in this, that's the duality of this film. Like, it might traffic in this stuff, and I'm never going to tell people that they should not be offended by what they're seeing. But the fact that there are people from this community who are given these cameo roles in, maybe, I don't know if it was intentional recognition, but I like to think it was. I just love that so much. And obviously, Big Trouble had a bigger target on its back because Year of the Dragon had just come out the year prior. That's set in New York, and that movie stars Mickey Rourke as a detective taking on the triads in New York's Chinatown, and it is liberally sprinkled with racist slurs. And Rourke, true to form, stuck his big old meaty Mickey foot in his mouth when he was asked about it. He was talking to the New York Times in 1985 about the controversy, and he railed against LA City Councilman Mike Wu, who is one of Year of the Dragon's most vocal opponents. And Mickey said he's only become involved in that issue to elevate himself politically. Year of the Dragon was nominated for 5 Razzie noms and made $18.7 million at the box office, failing to recoup its $24 million budget, which is the nail in the coffin for old Mikey Sims. And probably Mickey Rourke for a little while. So anyway, all that said, though, there are some errors in Big Trouble in Little China. There's a funny bit when the 3 storms first appear and Thunder says, "We want no," and pulls out. They all pull out those knives and do a sweet front flip and throw the knives, and it's really cool. And it rocks. Huan Du translates to soul returning blades, which is metal as hell. However, those knives are Nepalese Kirki blades used by the Gurkha military regiments in the British Indian Army. So, CinemaSins, ding! Lopan's backstory is also incorrect. Funnily enough, when it's explained to Jack that the first sovereign emperor of China defeated Lopan and imposed upon him the horrible curse of no flesh in 272 BC, that's incorrect. The first sovereign emperor of China was Qing Shi Huang, but he did not become emperor until 220 BC. And wasn't even born until 260 BC. I mean, God, I sure hope someone lost their job over that one. But that character, that sovereign emperor, Qin Shi Huang, is the same emperor who is resurrected as the villain in Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, the much maligned third entry in the Mummy, Brendan Fraser Mummy trilogy, where he's played by Jet Li. And there's a translation, or not, I don't know, idiomatic error. Egg Shan describes Lo Pan at one point as the bodhisattva of the underworld. Bodhisattva, aside from being a killer Steely Dan deep cut, is an old Sanskrit term for someone who has attained Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. The term would never be used to describe an evil spirit.
So there.
Did I mention I love this movie? So much. And have so many of these line readings burnt in my head.
I'm going to start a GoFundMe to get you that coffee table book. It's a damn shame you don't have it.
Yeah, well, I don't think I was online enough when it came out. Anyway, John J. Lloyd, who's a production designer, does a beautiful job with the interior. Every set of this movie, the sliding doors, all the lacquered stuff in the hideout, the lair at the end of the movie with that crazy neon demon sculpture and the skull that the elevator comes out. What the hell is that? What kind of drugs was this old crusty white guy on to design that? That is just an incredible interior set. Yeah, and so in the aforementioned, I went and watched his AFI, his American Film Institute interview, and he just recalls this one being a fun script, and he said it was a rushed production. That's all he had to say about it. Believe me, I wanted to know so much about it. Yeah, and that's true. They had 3 weeks of post-production. Dean Cundy told the American Society of Cinematographers that he had 12 weeks to shoot and 4 months of post, which is not a lot for a movie that I think it was 25 mil. It's a hefty budget, too. Jordan, take us into creature territory.
Yes, the real MVP in the world of Big Trouble in Little China is FX designer Steve Johnson, who created the incredible old age makeup James Hong wears as the wheelchair-bound Lo Pan, as well as the array of fantastic monsters that populate the underworld, like the hairy wild man that snatches Kim Cattrall's character, the bug monster that eats one of the good guys, and of course, the eyeball-tongued guardian character that prompts one of Jack Burton's best lines in the film. Please do it for us.
Oh my God, what is that? Don't tell me. It's that and the you will come out no more line. What? What will come out no more? That's just my favorite lines in the movie, man. Or wait, at the end when he's like, you know what old Jack Burton says a time like this, and Lo Pan is like, who? He's like, Jack Burton, me. Anyway, sorry.
No, you guys, I cannot match your enthusiasm and joy. Actually, no, I can match your enthusiasm, but not your expertise on this. Please.
Well, so Steve Johnson said when he got this script, he said, it's loaded with all kinds of animatronics and makeup effects and a smorgasbord of everything that we people, effects people, get erections over. And the man said that to Entertainment Weekly. God love him. James Hong, it cannot be said enough that he's in like 12-inch heels to play tall wizard Lo Pan, and then that crazy old age makeup to play wheelchair David Lo Pan. And James Hong told Entertainment Weekly, when Steve Johnson worked on me, he took the utmost care with every hair because nothing was digital in those days. The first day of work, I think it took him 9 or 10 hours to put that makeup on. So James Hong makeup for the film was 10 overlapping facial appliances, a shoulder hump, and hair that was hand punched into like a bald cap. And then when he transforms or whatever, I love this. They just made a dummy head and stuck a 1,000-watt bulb inside of it. But they knew that it was going to burn so hot that it would melt down the effect. So they had to like actually really plot out the shot. And then they ended up getting it on the first take. James Hong is so funny in this movie. That opening scene where he comes in like, shut up, Mr. Button. And indeed, that's our buddy Ben Trivett's favorite line from that movie. And a lot of times Ben will just hit you out of nowhere with indeed. Yeah, and he had to drape that incredible kimono robe that he wears over those 12-inch lifts. And when he was talking about going down the elevator, he wanted to get his stunt double to do it. And John Carpenter was like, and here's my Smokey impression. No, James, we don't have enough time. You got to do it. Rolling. Sound. Steve Johnson said he found James Hong's performance in that scene so funny that John Carpenter threw him off the set after he ruined 3 straight takes by bursting into laughter. Which is amazing because James Hong, was doing this kind of inscrutable Asian. He was typecast a little bit, so he's doing this kind of inscrutable Asian character. But he got to start doing performances for the USO, doing Al Jolson routines in blackface during World War II. For the Wild Man character, Steve Johnson told CineFX that they used a modified version of the ape suit that fellow FX god Rick Baker used in the Tarzan flick Greystoke, Legend of the Apes, I think that movie is subtitled, starring Christopher Lambert, if memory serves, which is our second Highlander reference. Third, because we talked about our boy Clancy. It all comes back to Highlander.
Have I not mentioned Sean Connery in this episode yet?
No, but I was about to hit you with, actually, I don't remember any of his fucking lines in Highlander. There can only be one.
Oh, yeah, that's the only one I know.
No. That monster suit for the Wild Man is 3 layers. It's spandex, and then muscle padding over that, and then another spandex-like layer, which is painted to look like skin, and every one of those hairs was hand-punched and knotted, one at a time, for that suit. The head of that was rigged with a mechanism that let the guy kind of do the mouth and stuff for his roaring and everything. And then they rigged another head for just the insert shots of it. And that had 20 different cables inside of it that let them individually control the eyes, ears, lips, cheeks, and brows of that thing's face. And then in that making of book, they never even mentioned the guy who's in the suit because he was a diva about being in it. He was constantly complaining about how hot it was. He was asking for extra padding when he has to do the little jump, and he wouldn't walk in a particular way that Steve Johnson asked him for, so they dragged him. Yeah, I've already talked about my favorite line when the sewer monster comes out. That is a segue for one of my favorite guys of all time, SFX guys, Screamin' Mad George. Yes, the name is a tribute to Screamin' Jay Hawkins. Screamin' Mad George, his specialty as an FX artist is gross body horror stuff. Usually things that involve distensions or inflations or melting. I cannot in good conscience actually tell anyone to go and YouTube the closing sequence or the climactic sequence of a film called Society. It is decidedly NSFW and maybe emotionally scarring, but it's incredible. It's one of the high watermarks of rubber work at the time. My God, it's so gross. Anyway, so he did some work on this film. He is responsible for the sculpt of when thunder self-inflates and blows up. But the sewer monster is also Screamin' Mad George. And that was a full-size puppet. That thing was the size of a car. It was foam latex over solid steel armature, and they used sculpted glue sticks for its fangs. And it was mounted on a track in that tunnel. So they had a puppeteer inside it who was rigging the head and movements, and then its arms and legs were manipulated by guys outside of it with wires. And the thing was potentially deadly. Johnson said we had to be extremely careful that when the monster shot out on the track, it didn't accidentally hit the guy, because if he had been hit, it would have been like he was hit by a car. So they basically force perspectived it. They had it shot in a way that there was no way that it would actually impact with his body. And then they cut to a reaction shot. And then Screamin' Mad George created spring mechanized legs that they shoved in this full-size puppet's mouth. And then, so when the guy moved the monster's mouth, the legs would jimmy around like they were being eaten. God, I love it. Screamin' Mad George had a punk rock band at one point that he fronted in LA that all of his like creations were trotted out during part of the stage show, which makes him kind of an early forerunner to like Gwar.
What did Gwar do?
Oh, well, Gwar were all art school kids who they wanted to make a metal band, but they also have all these horrifying practical monsters and makeup in their.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, all their costumes are really ridiculous, but Screamin' Mad George was doing the same thing. Jordan, tell us about the eyeball monster, the Guardian. What it sees, Lopan knows. I'm doing the spirit fingers at my camera, and Jordan right now, so he just sees my pale fingers waving at him.
Special effects designer Steve Jordan. That's not his name. Special
Different guy.
effects designer.
Session drumming icon, Steve Jordan, renowned for his place in the Rolling Stones and also designing FX for Big Trouble in Little China.
Special effects designer Steve Johnson told Entertainment Weekly about this eyeball being, that was probably the most complicated thing we did on the film, and I think it may have been one of the most complicated things ever at that time. The only way to do it was with a huge animatronic puppet, but imagine how many motors go inside it. The eyes all had to have upper and lower blinks. Some of the eyeballs were actually on stalks that could retract into and poke out. And then, of course, he had a face, he had a mouth, he had a tongue. We had so many motors in that. And what you see in the film is actually two different 24-inch puppets that were shrunk down and composited for when it's flying, and each one took up to 24 puppeteers to manage, mostly because of its highly expressive face.
It's crazy to me that they made those things bigger. They
Yeah.
made them 2 feet in diameter and then shrunk. If I was this team that put this together, I'd be like, you made it smaller? But they talk about how they composited that. They literally just like, it was like a cutout shot for the compositing. They just made a cut in the print of it, the background where it was supposed to be, and just like pasted this thing in.
Oh my God. And that cost $100,000 of the film's, $25 million budget?
Yeah.
Impressive.
Worth every penny.
I mean, that's up there with Falcor for the Never-Ending Story. Didn't that require
Right.
some insane number of puppeteers to activate?
I mean, this is where to paraphrase Hunter S. Thompson, this is where the wave crested and broke, man.
Yeah,
Like, this
oh,
is
yeah.
the era when that is just at an all-time high.
We our first episode was Hook, and I think that I would argue, having put zero research into this, that Hook might have been the
Production
high
design
watermark.
and sets. Production design and sets,
Yeah.
certainly. But I think as far as makeup, you're not going to get more than this, like The Thing, American Werewolf in London. I mean, like,
Yeah.
skin on gross stuff, goop, wet puppets, if you will. Speaking of enormous chunks of the film budgets, Peter Kwong's wig as Rain cost $3,000.
Worth every penny once again.
Much like the studios, he said he had no idea he was shooting a comedy until he was fighting Wang at the end, and Dennis Dunn does a little eyebrow raise at him in the middle of the fight, which I love. And then he was like, "Oh, this is camp." That scene is great when the two of them are fighting, flying through the air, fighting. Which John Carpenter, I think, like, he clearly saw this stuff like wire work in like the movies that he name dropped, and then was like, "Yeah, but I don't want to do that. I want to spend more time on the monsters." And so those scenes of them flying through the air, they are just upright and stationary dueling, and then the camera is the print is actually canted at 45 degrees, and it's rear projection to make the background look like it goes flying by. Dennis Dunn was not an experienced martial artist, but he did learn how to use the sword for that film. And yeah, like, that's not wire work. It's just guys bounced around on trampolines at the end, which is another thing I love. They were like, yeah, the $100,000 on this puppet, but no wires. You guys get trampolines.
And we blew the cigar chomping executive. We blew the budget on the guy's wig.
Yeah, exactly.
The
3,000 for a wig.
stitched every hair punched
Cut
through
the
into
wire budget. They get trampolines. Used trampolines. As you meditate on that, we'll be right back with more Too Much Information after these messages.
I love that you were so much of a nerd that you're giving me the background on a bus that was used in this movie. The bus
yes.
that Egg Shen drives is a 1936 Yellowstone National Park tour bus. And at the height of their popularity within Yellowstone in the mid-1920s, more than 400 of these vehicles operated within the park, the second largest bus fleet in the country after Greyhound. I did not know that.
Hell yeah, National Park System.
And you're not sure if there are any more, but for a while, the actual bus from this movie was still in operation at the park. So they got a loaner bus, and it earned the nickname Hollywood, this bus, for its appearance not only in Big Trouble in Little China, but also on the TV show MASH, or the movie MASH. Probably the TV show
movie,
MASH.
yeah. I was unable to track it down. There are no references to it on the actual Yellowstone site, but if you can find people's like TripAdvisor reviews where they're like, "We rode in the bus from Big Trouble in Little China."
That rule. I'm kind of shocked you haven't made a pilgrimage.
I don't know. I didn't put in a call to Yellowstone to confirm or deny that Hollywood was still in circulation, but I would.
Well, you live in San Francisco now. Were there any location shots that you could go visit?
Well, the Oakland waterfront, I don't know where they shot the early stuff in the Oakland waterfront. But yeah, you can, there's like parts of Chinatown that you can go through that are just establishing shots. Also, I've been to SFO a bunch of times. Another great buffoon part for Jack. He immediately strides into that situation with the gang members and he's like, "All right, buddy, let's try that one more time," and just gets taken out again. And speaking of Egg Shen, his hideout is Fire Station 23 in LA, which is the Ghostbusters headquarters. Come on.
Wow.
It's in a bunch of movies, apparently. But speaking of male friendship and Egg Shen.
Yes. Dennis Dunn, who played Wang Shi, was so inspired by his experience working with Victor Wong, who plays Egg Shen, that he named his daughter Victoria in his honor. And their friendship actually spanned years before this movie and after this movie. Dunn and Wong had performed in plays together at San Francisco's Asian American Theater Company, and they made 3 films together in 3 years. The aforementioned Year of the Dragon in 1985, Big Trouble in 1986, and another John Carpenter movie, The Prince of Darkness in 1987.
Yeah, Victor Wong can't be stressed enough. Is like a bizarre legend, really. I mean, he's also in Tremors, another of the greatest movies ever made. And he's the grandpa in Three Ninjas, another movie. It was a big deal for me growing up. But yeah, he's literally in the Jack Kerouac novel Big Sur. He's fictionalized a character that Jack Kerouac wrote under a pseudonym.
Wow.
And he was like, he was a journalist. He studied political science at UC Berkeley. He was a member of the Second City in Chicago. He studied at the San Francisco Art Institute under Mark Rothko. He won a regional Emmy. Like, this guy is just literally like, he's like the friggin' Forrest Gump of the Bay Area. He's just like in all of this stuff. He was friends with Lawrence Ferlinghetti and
Wow.
City Lights. He had his first art showing at City Lights. Like, fascinating guy. Speaking of automotives, Jack's truck is a 1985 Freightliner FLC 120. This is the thing that grieves me most heartily about doing this episode, is that I found a news story about this truck, and I can't get past the paywall to get it. So this truck, this Freightliner, somehow made it to Calais, Maine, where it was owned and operated by a guy named Wilfred O'Brien, who drove it up until 2018, and then in 2020, it was shipped off to England. And I don't know if it's in a museum there. I don't know what's going on. I desperately need to know. A lot of people have speculated that Raiden from the video game Mortal Kombat is stolen from this movie. Specifically Lightning, who is one of the 3 Storms, the henchman in it, because he has that distinctive conical hat. And Mortal Kombat co-creator John Tobias confirmed that on Twitter. Another thing that's repeated is that the character in that game, Shang Tsung, the big bad, was inspired by Lo Pan, but I wasn't able to pin that down. But those hats are actually a reference to another martial arts film. I think it's the Lone Wolf and Cub trilogy. I'm kicking myself for not putting that in there. But so they made it into Big Trouble as reference to another Hong Kong movie, and they made it into Mortal Kombat as a reference to Big Trouble, which I love. Speaking of that character, Lightning, when he dies, when he's crushed by rocks and he explodes into lightning, the SFX team made some of the lightning spell out the Chinese character for the word carpenter as a tribute to John Carpenter. Isn't that cute?
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
James Hong explained to Entertainment Weekly that the duel between Egg Shen and Lo Pan at the end of the film was not outlined in the script, so he and Victor Wong decided how it would go. He said Victor and I had seen all these Chinese films where the two opponents would fight each other with this hand magic, where things would come out of their hands. That's an old Chinese fable type of magic fighting. So Victor decided to throw balls at me of fire, and I invented that I would cross my little fingers and little rays would come out. And Carpenter put that in the film. Surprised they didn't go to the WGA for credit on that.
Yeah, right.
Seriously. Jack Burton going through one of the last few scenes with Gracie's lipstick still on his face, which I actually totally missed. Wasn't in the
It's
script.
so funny. You see so many like promo stills from or like if you look up Jack Burton in Big Trouble like in Google, that's one of the things that comes up is just that gorgeous feathered mullet and just like bright red lipstick on his face.
Kurt Russell told Entertainment Weekly, "One time, Kim and I kissed. Then I noticed that the crew was smirking. I had lipstick all over my face. I said, I've always wondered about that. In kissing scenes, how come that big red lipstick is always magically not there when the guy pulls back? I looked at John and I started laughing. I said, let's leave the lipstick on at least a couple of scenes. And he said, all right."
Kurt wants to leave the lipstick on for a shot. Rolling. Those awesome boots that he wears in the movie
Yeah.
were handmade at a place he knew in Aspen.
Do you know what brand those are? I feel like you need those.
I did find a place that does custom like knee-high leather moccasins, but not in the budget. They are marketed as the Big Trouble boots. I don't know if it's the same guy. I assume that guy might be dead. This movie is almost 40 years old. All the water scenes, which again, the hell of the upside down sinners. Chinese people got a lot of hells. What else? Yeah, there's the. I used to have all of them memorized. There's the hell of the upside down sinners. The hell where people are boiled alive. There's so many different. Yeah, Chinese people got a lot of hells. Margot Burton recalled that every day I would come into work and go into hair and makeup and look absolutely stunning. Then the next thing that would happen is someone would throw a bucket of water on my head. When they're swimming through the tunnel and they come up for air and Jack Burton's like, would you stop pressing your body up against mine when we're swimming? It makes it really hard for me.
When Jack Burton is running and being shot at near the end of the film, one of the squibs went off too early and a little too close to Kurt Russell's head. In the DVD commentary, Kurt recalls that it's one of the only times he's seen Carpenter lose his cool on the set. And I am going to speculate that it might be because this was around the same time that an actor named John Eric Hexum accidentally killed himself when he shot himself in the temple with a blank when he was just joking around on a set of a TV show called...
Well, there's the Twilight Zone death.
No,
that
it
was
was
helicopters.
show called Cover Up. And he was just playing around. He didn't realize that with a squib, something actually does fly out if it's pressed like up against your skin.
Jesus.
So maybe he was just being extra cautious, Carpenter.
Or it was because he was worried about his best friend, Kurt Russell.
That's what I mean, yeah.
At the end of the DVD commentary track, Kurt Russell says, of their day together recording, he says, the beer's been good and the cigarettes aren't stale. It's just like such an American dude thing to say about you hanging out with your buddy. Well, now we have to talk about the theme song to the movie, recorded by Carpenter and the Coupe de Villes. The music video for this makes its rounds every couple of years because people are just struck anew by how ridiculous it is and how amazing. There's everybody wearing like big blazers, and I think he's playing a Beatle bass. He's like playing a Hofner in it in the video. That band is Tommy Lee Wallace, who is the film's production designer and one of Carpenter's cronies. They both grew up in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and they were classmates at USC, along with the stuntman Nick Castle, who is one of the men who played Michael Myers. The three of them used to get together and sing like harmony, like 3-part harmony stuff, and little novelty songs that they wrote while they were at USC. And they reformed for the purposes of Big Trouble in Little China to get together and play. And they have a full-length album out under the name Coupe de Villes called Waiting Out the 80s.
That's good.
It was distributed only to friends. And so consequently, copies of this thing are going for hundreds of dollars online. But I have one of the songs here. This is the title track.
truth is here. Out of the darkness coming, baby, all the things you feel.
That kind of goes. Like, if you were to tell me that was a Fleetwood Mac demo from the Tusk era, I'd be like, oh, sure. Yeah. Really raw production. Really revolutionary what Lindsay was doing at the time.
The cottage industry of really expensive side projects and things associated with this movie, from the making of hardcover book to this album, I'm very impressed.
Yeah, the apocrypha you can get into as a Big Trouble fan is really bank breaking. So now we have to get into the sad part of the film, which is, of course, that it came out in the studio, or when it was done, the studio was like, what the hell do we have here? It is part of the movie's lore that it is abysmally marketed. In the DVD commentary, Russell remembers, and he's talked about this in other interviews, he was doing press for the film, and people were like, how does it feel to be in one of the biggest movies of the year? Because their test screenings were so good. People saw this and were like, holy shit, what is this? And then he said, I kept waiting to see ads and things that just didn't happen.
Oh. John Carpenter says in the commentary for the movie that Fox had a mandate at that time to not spend more than $3 million marketing a film. But even if they had spent that, they must have spent that poorly. Materials focused on Russell asking, who is Jack Burton? Which is just so not the angle you want to go with when promoting this movie.
Yeah, I think it's Kurt Russell who's like, in an interview, he's like, all the posters were asking, who is Jack Burton? And everyone said, I don't know. I don't care. Also, like, the original poster for this movie is Drew Struzan, who's like one of the most iconic poster guys of all time. But Kurt Russell joked that he didn't recognize himself on the poster, which is fair. It is truly one of the shittiest of Drew Struzan's incredible movie posters. He looks like a gremlin. Like, he looks like a completely different person.
I mean, the real poster for this movie that you see more often these days is kind of weird because his head is very large.
Well, yeah, and it's like him and Kim Cattrall up front, but this one's really bad. I don't even know what he looks like in here. What you would even describe this particular.
Well, everything that's a part of his face has been shrunken down.
Yeah, like you got the chin wrong. How do you get Kurt Russell's chin wrong? Anyway,
John Carpenter pointed out another factor in an interview with the Ottawa Citizen in July 1986, saying, in the time it's taken me to make Big Trouble in Little China, there have been major changes at Fox. Larry Gordon was the president when I began the film. Now Gordon is gone, and Alan Horn is president. And another telling quote that he gave to Total Film in 2021, on Big Trouble, I was working with the head of a studio who was an intentionally cruel human being. I just didn't want to deal with that anymore. One big problem was that the film was up against some serious competition when it was released on July 2nd, 1986, including from Fox itself, its own studio, which sent Alien into theaters just over 2 weeks after Big Trouble in Little China. It also went up against The Great Mouse Detective, Prince's highly anticipated follow-up to Purple Rain, Under the Cherry Moon, Stephen King's directorial debut Maximum Overdrive, and that was just all in July. Critics didn't love Big Trouble in Little China. It pulled in a disappointing $11.1 million at the box office, which means that even Psycho 3 outgrossed it, which does feel criminal. And also John Cassavetes' last film, also called Big Trouble, starring Alan Arkin and Beverly D'Angelo, had been released 5 weeks prior to John Carpenter's Big Trouble in Little China. So title confusion probably didn't help.
Carpenter has said that the film's mismarketing and reception was basically responsible for him abandoning major studios and financing his movies independently going forward. He said in 1987, at one time, I thought I wanted to be a big-budget, major studio Hollywood director. Now, I realize that I don't. There's no way. I can't do it. I hate authority too much. After making 4 big-budget, major studio Hollywood films, I was burned out. The grind of production, the dishonesty of the studios, and the corruption involved in advertising, publicity, and the press made me want to quit. When you make a big-budget film, you get trapped into so many situations that you don't want to be in. You're making a movie with the studio's money, and they'll spend it the way that they want. I think it was this and Memoirs of an Invisible Man and working with Chevy Chase that he's cited as the 1-2 punch of him wanting to retire.
That'll do it. But Big Trouble in Little China did have a long life, becoming a cult classic and a big hit when it was released on home media. But in basically every interview, it seems like John Carpenter's still stung by it. Asked about stuff like this in The Thing, he usually says something to the effect of, well, better late than never.
It's sad because he really seems to take it to heart. I really do feel for him because he is such it's he's one of the great examples of people who got chewed up by the system of their art form. And like he might have let go of some of that bitterness because he's just high and watching the Warriors and playing video games and noodling around on synths. So he's had about as great a retirement as anyone could. But yeah, man, that fucking sucks. Imagine like you have like an incredible 10-year run doing shit like Halloween and The Thing and this, and they're flops except for Halloween. But like, yeah. Poor guy. I just feel bad for John Carpenter. I want to tell him it's okay. Maybe one day I will.
Yeah.
You've repeatedly, to Jordan's credit, he's repeatedly offered to use his clout to try and get me an interview with John Carpenter. But as anyone who is a John Carpenter fan knows, the man does not like interviews and only comes alive talking about video games or the Warriors.
He would like talking to you.
I don't know. I feel like I'd get on and just start gushing. He'd be like, yeah.
Well, Sonic's not about to play itself, so...
Yeah. Warriors are doing well this season.
Everything from comic books to board and video games have added to the Big Trouble in Little China lore. And for a long time, it was rumored that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was going to star in a sequel or reboot or requel or whatever the hell they call it now of Big Trouble. But that has thankfully stalled out, you say.
Yeah, it's one of the kind of like great unmade things of the past 10 years. It's because The Rock has been talking about it for a long damn time, but as John Carpenter indelibly put at one point in an interview that I read, he's like, the studio wants a movie with The Rock and they want the name. They don't want me. So yeah, I don't think it's ever going to happen, especially after Black Adam came out and The Rock used all of his clout and money to get that made, and then that didn't do very well. So
I don't know if I...
That was a big DC one that DC Warner DC had a shitty fucking year because they put out Black Adam, then they put out The Flash and Blue Beetle, and the next thing on their slate is Aquaman 2, which is shaping up to be one of the biggest flops, or at least one of the most dramatic productions. The big news from that today was that James Wan and Jason Momoa wanted to cut Amber Heard's or recast her, and Elon Musk, because he had dated Amber Heard, threatened to sue them and the studio. Like his lawyers sent a legal letter to the studio threatening, like, I believe the phrase was scorched earth if she was recast or cut. Anyway, so
the story for The Flash, the DC movie, was written by John Francis Daley, who played Sam Weir on Freaks and Geeks. The littlest freak, or no, littlest geek, I guess.
I'm so sorry that he will not get another chance to make one after this. So, Golden Child. Jordan, are you familiar with the Golden Child?
I only knew of it because didn't Barry Gordy finance it? Wasn't it a Motown produced movie?
I think you're thinking of The Last Dragon.
I am. So no, I'm not.
Fun fact, though, the woman with the bow staff that shoots smoke in one of the scenes in Big Trouble in Little China is also in The Last Dragon. And is like a famous entertainment journalist, Leah Chang.
Cool.
So, The Golden Child stars Eddie Murphy. It is also a movie about a smart aleck Westerner descending into a world of Eastern mysticism. How did two of them get greenlit at the same time? Big Trouble, it seems at this point, to have become the winner of the battle, but it is a weird coincidence. Eddie Murphy stars in the film as Chandler Jarrell, a Los Angeles social worker who is told that he is the chosen one, who is fated to save the Golden Child, who is a kidnapped Tibetan boy with mystical powers, said to be the savior of all mankind. The Golden Child evolved from a script by Dennis Feldman, who is a Nepo baby. Dad was a Hollywood attorney who became a producer and an executive. And yeah, he was involved in the Wild Bunch. Anyway, this guy went to Harvard, became a documentary filmmaker. And his only writing credit before he wrote The Golden Child was an adaptation of Shakespeare's Twelfth Night called Just One of the Guys.
Oh, that's a classic with
someone. Wasn't it remade with what's her name? A pre-breakdown
Amanda Bynes?
Yeah.
I had like Joyce Heiser's like the woman's name, I think. Yeah, it's a classic movie.
So Feldman's original script for The Golden Child was called The Rose of Tibet, which he would later describe as a Raymond Chandler movie with supernatural elements. He originally wanted the role to be played very straight, and Mel Gibson was in mind for it. But Eddie Murphy loved this script so much that he selected the film from 20 different projects that were in development at Paramount for him, following the hot streak of 48 Hours and Beverly Hills Cop, which is hilarious because he ended up hating it. And Carpenter turned it down. So Mad Max director George Miller was also in the running for Golden Child. But the Golden Child was ultimately directed by Michael Ritchie, who did Bad News Bears and Fletch, one of the good Chevy Chase movies. Apparently Golden Child, like Big Trouble, was subject to a lot of studio interference. Charles Dance, Tywin Lannister himself, who plays the film's bad guy, Numsat. This guy, you'll never in a million years guess what this villain's name is. Sardo Numspa.
No way.
Yeah. Anyway, he told Fangoria, when they first screened it, it was a very different sort of film for Eddie Murphy. Paramount took too much notice of the preview audience's unease about the unfamiliarity of Eddie's character. They had gotten to know him so well through Beverly Hills Cop that they wanted the character to be much more like that. So the studio went back and reshot a lot of footage of Eddie doing, quote, Eddie Murphyisms and put them in the picture. Then they took out a really sumptuous, weird, and beautiful score by John Williams and replaced it with something more funky. So basically what you got was Beverly Hills Cop in Tibet. This is a big part of the lore of this movie, that they went back and just had Eddie Murphy like riff and did a bunch of like button jokes to scenes. And he is obviously phoning it in so hard during it. And Carpenter backs this up, since it was commonly known in the trades in the industry that he had turned down Golden Child to do Big Trouble. People kept asking John Carpenter about it, and he started off pretty sanguine about it. He told Starlog, the films have a similar theme in that they both explore Chinese legend and magic, but they developed in different ways. Golden Child is a very fine script. It has its problems, but it also has one big plus, Eddie Murphy. It will be hard to pull off that script, but if they do, it could be a wonderful movie. And then later... in that same interview, though, he told Starlog, if Big Trouble in Little China were released at the same time as Golden Child, we would be killed at the box office. Which, whoops.
Why did they do that?
Executive brain.
Yeah.
So in another widely cited interview that I haven't been able to source, unfortunately, John Carpenter supposedly said, originally Golden Child was a serious Chinese mystical, very sweet, very nice film. But now they don't know whether to make it funny or serious. And then he doubled down on that and he continued, Golden Child is basically the same movie as Big Trouble. How many adventure pictures dealing with Chinese mysticism have been released by the major studios in the past 20 years? For two of them to come along at the exact same time is more than mere coincidence.
Isn't that like Armageddon and Deep Impact? I feel like there's a phenomenon of...
Dante's Peak and Volcano.
Yeah.
I mean, it happens. Hollywood is gossips like a small town. I'm sure these execs were like, we got one of those now too, don't we? Put one of those on our dock.
So Big Trouble in Little China made $11.1 million on a $25 million budget. Eddie Murphy's Golden Child, I don't know what it was budgeted for, but made almost $80 million. Wow. So I didn't realize that he got beat that bad.
Yeah. And
Poor
nobody
JC.
like talks about this movie. That's what's really funny to me. And it's bad too. There was a famous, like, scathing Janet Maslin review of it. Let's see if I can find it.
Well, most major parties associated with Golden Child hate it. Writer Dennis Feldman was disappointed with the film and thought they should have taken the script more seriously. But, he says, instead, everybody wanted to make it an Eddie Murphy comedy. Adding of Michael Ritchie, it's not what the director should have done, and he didn't even do it that well either. Meanwhile, Eddie Murphy himself famously told Rolling Stone, my pictures make their money back. No matter how I feel about, for instance, The Golden Child, which was a piece of shit, the movie made more than $100 million, so who am I to say it sucks? And then he made Pluto Nash.
Yeah. Time has been equally unkind to the film. Big Trouble sits at a 74% critical and 82% audience score at Rotten Tomatoes. Golden Child has 21% critical and 47% audience. So suck it. One silver lining for the cast and crew of Big Trouble, though, was that Peter Kwong, who played Rain, told Uproxx, half our people went from Big Trouble in Little China to The Golden Child. So it was a nice little hiring boost for the Asian American community in Hollywood. He says, James Hong, Victor Wong, I was on Golden Child. A lot of people that were from our camp were cast. So I guess that's fine. I don't know. My love for this movie is apparent and abiding as we go into our second and a half hour of talking about it. I'm literally going hoarse from being so effusive. I will give our boy JC the last word here from a 2014 interview with Flashback Files. We don't need to revisit this, but I can say that when the movie came out, it wasn't a big hit. It wasn't reviewed particularly well. And they attacked Kurt. F*** them. I don't care. I love that movie.
Goes for JC, goes for me too. Well, Heigl, we really shook the pillars of heaven, didn't we? Delivered in my best John Wayne via Kurt Russell inflection. The beer's been good, and the cigarettes aren't stale. Thank you for sharing this beloved film of yours with me.
When some wild-eyed 8-foot maniac grabs your neck, taps the back of your favorite head up against the barroom wall, and he looks you crooked in the eyes and asks you if you paid your dues, you just stare that big sucker right back in the eye, and you remember what old Jack Burton says at a time like that. Have you paid your dues, Jack? Yes, sir, the check is in the mail. This has been Big Trouble and Too Much Information. I'm Alex Heigl.
And I'm Jordan Runtagh. We'll catch you next time.
Too Much Information was a production of iHeartRadio.
The show's executive producers are Noel Brown and Jordan Runtagh.
The show's supervising producer is Michael Alder June.
The show was researched, written, and hosted by Jordan Runtagh and Alex Heigl.
With original music by Seth Applebaum and the Ghost Funk Orchestra. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. For more podcasts on iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.